The First Shogun's General, Part 6, Chapter 12, The Difference, POV, Yoshitsune. It has been one day since me and Michikatsu hit the road again. We stayed with the family for 6 more days before departing. Unfortunately, the training I had planned for Michikatsu, regenerate while standing on lava, was shot down by my wife. She said that if she heard I did that sort of training with Michikatsu after we left, she would delegate me to the guest futon again for 30 years. A 5-year increase in the punishment's time. While I agreed it didn't mean Michikatsu wouldn't experience that training, he had for now merely avoided doing it first. She never said it couldn't be second. So, since she shot down lava regeneration training, I had to go with the second option, technique training. I was originally planning on doing this after the lava regeneration training as a sort of way to reward Michikatsu for all the hard work he would have put into that training. But now it was going to be first, and the lava was going to be second. At least I won't get any complaints like I did from Yushiro, I thought in relief. Yushiro hated the lava, but if there was one thing he hated even more, technique training. Yushiro had absolutely zero talent for sword play. When I discovered this, instead of declaring that he couldn't do the training, I gave him multiple different weapons to choose from. He ended up choosing the Yari, specifically the Su-Yari, and he was an absolute prodigy with it. He didn't attack with overwhelming speed, though he absolutely could, no crushing force, though he could. He instead used control. He kept enemies at a distance, never engaging directly with them. This didn't mean he couldn't fight in close combat. He could. He also was a prodigious talent in close combat too. He just did it to have complete control of the battle. Fight against Yushiro, and you're no longer battling on your terms. You're now battling on his. Blinking out of my thoughts, I saw we had reached our destination, an overgrown forest. Looking to my right side, I saw Michikatsu inhale and exhale deeply through his nose, probably thinking another maze was in store. Well, lucky for him, he was wrong. I walked into the overgrown forest, pushing branches and leaves out of the way as Michikatsu followed close behind me. It was another 20 minutes of doing this, as then pushing one last final branch out of the way, we had reached it. It was a large clearing, easily spanning a mile in size. There was a modest compound located on the clearing, and if you took a closer look at certain areas, they looked like they used to be training fields. "What is this place?" I heard Michikatsu ask, in a mixture of awe and curiosity. I smiled a nostalgic smile while turning behind to look at him. "This, my son, is the old Demon Slayer headquarters of the Yaibas." Seeing his eyes widen and his mouth slightly hang open was hilarious. POV. Michikatsu. When Father told me what this place was, I was shocked. How could I not be? I was a Hashira, one of the first, and I never knew about this place. I always thought that the old headquarters was the original one. We were all told by the Oyakata of the time that it was. I decided to voice my question to Father. POV Yoshitsune. Father, I thought the old headquarters of the Ubuyashiki was the original. Hearing my son ask me this, I chuckled. Oh, it is, at least for the Ubuyashikis. Seeing the confusion that had deepened on my son's face, I explained. The Demon Slayer Corps of the Technique era and the Demon Slayer Corps of the Breathing era are two different organizations. Seeing my son's gobsmacked look, I continued. Yes, you heard right. They are two different organizations, led by two different people. Seeing my son's extreme befuddlement, I elaborated. The Technique Corps, as I will refer to them from now on, were led by the strongest swordsman among them. Asahi was the third leader, with Nagareru being the second. The first leader I never met, as they died before I could. From what little I know, his strength would be about Yorichi's when he fought Muzan. The Breathing Corps, on the other hand, they have always been led by the Ubuyashiki clan. Seeing how my explanation was making sense to him, I continued on. The differences, though, extend far beyond who just led the Corps. The Technique Corps were the Demon Slayers from the year 1189 to 1289, lasting only a century. The Breathing Corps, on the other hand, were the Demon Slayers from the year 1312 to the present. They only first formed 480 years after Muzan first became a demon. Looking at Michikatsu, and seeing he was paying attention, I continued, the Ubuyashikis claim that they were the first to fight Muzan and his demons is a lie, as you can see, though it is true they are related to Muzan. Watching Michikatsu nod in confirmation of this, I continued forwards. While I do not know why they claim they were the first, it is obvious the Ubuyashiki knew that the Technique Corps started fighting demons 123 years before they did. Even then, the Technique Corps were not the first to fight demons either. The original Demon Slayers just used any Nichiren weapon they could craft, and fought demons from the year 932 to 1082. 150 years of fighting demons, and 107 years before the Technique Corps first established themselves. Seeing Michikatsu's eyes widened and about to ask a question, I sighed and shook my head. No, I do not know much else about the original Demon Slayers other than the fact they only used Nichiren weapons of any kind, and that they truly fought demons with just frail, regular human bodies, no enhanced anything. Seeing Michikatsu's obvious disappointment, I sighed. Sorry, son, but I first met the Demon Slayers in the year 1259, and only started training with them in 1262. Only one alive who could tell you about them is Father, but he's indisposed, as you already know. Hell, the only reason I know this much about them is because Ryuki told me stories about them. He was the one who single-handedly challenged all of them to a fight, and won too with ease. Watching Michikatsu's disappointment switch to confusion, I sighed. Remember, son, these slayers were just regular humans, nothing enhanced about them. While they were the first to take a stand against Father, and I respect them for it. But make no mistake, they were the weakest corps of the Demon Slayers. The strongest of them could at most dispatch a former Lower Moon 6 with only minor difficulty. The weakest? They would have easily been devoured by the weakest of demons. Seeing Michikatsu nod in understanding, I smiled. though that doesn't mean they weren't strong in a different way. Seeing Michikatsu perk up, I explained, "They are the second longest-lived corps for a reason. They were masters of disguise and sabotage. They were much more like shinobi than samurai." It worked, too. Seeing Michikatsu not show any disgust at the original corps being more like shinobi, I smiled. But that smile quickly faded as a deep frown replaced it. Though they were definitely the most ruthless of the other corps, and seemed to have no morals whatsoever. From some of what Ryuki told me about them, even then, the things he said only scratched the surface, as he refused to tell me anything more, as even their actions disgusted Father. So much so that he personally destroyed every record of the corps ever existing in the first place. Looking at my son's face, which had showed no disgust, be replaced with some disgust and a little bit of fear, I knew he understood just how amoral their actions must have been for Muzan himself to personally destroy all records of them ever existing. Shaking my head of these thoughts, I brought up the old topic. Now then, about the breathing corps. While they are the longest-lived corps, being able to boast being around for 598 years, they are still not the strongest. They have only survived this long because of hiding in plain sight and in very remote locations. Not because of their strength, but because of their intelligence. Seeing my son nod his head in agreement, I continued, "As you already know, my father was a great battle strategist. His human self, as you know, is not and is in fact one of the worst battle strategists I have ever heard of." Seeing Michikatsu nod again in agreement, I continued, "I mean, really, who thinks that it's natural for demons to win? While humans are much more fragile than demons, they have giant weaknesses. Exposed to sunlight, dead. Injected with wisteria poison, dead. Throw them in lava, dead. Light them on fire, dead. That's 4 major weaknesses, as weak demons can die by being lit on fire. By lava? Easy. Even upper moons would die to that. Then the big, hot, angry ball of fire in the sky? That is its own level of difficulty that I will never challenge, for I am not an idiot." Finishing this, I took deep breath before beginning to talk about the final corps. The Technique Corps were the strongest hands down, though they were also the smallest. Seeing Michikatsu perk up, I elaborated. "As you know, the Corps of today has members in the hundreds. The original had members in the 1000s. Seeing Michikatsu's shocked expression, I nodded. "Yes, members in the 1000s. It was another reason why they managed to last as long as they did. Whereas the Technique Corps, well, other than the Yebas and the apprentices that some of them took, there were only around 90 regular members of the Corps and about 40 part-time members that weren't full members because of positions they held in regular society. In total, the numbers of the Corps would be about 145 members. Watching my son's jaw drop was highly amusing. But nevertheless, I had to continue explaining. Yes, only 145 members. Even then, we had part-timers, so that brought the number down to 102, as half of the apprentices were also more part-timers than full-fledged members. To my current knowledge, the Breathing Corps has over 300 active members, and I think around 100 or so inactive members, like teachers or retired personnel. So in total, they have at the very least 350 members that could fight, and at the very most, over 400 members that could fight. More than double what we had. Watching at how my son's expression hadn't changed, I knew he knew this information and continued. Though what we lacked in quantity, we made up for in quality. Catching Michikatsu's interest, I elaborated, though we only had 102 members ready to be deployed at all times and 43 members that could be deployed only at certain times. All of the regular 40 part-time members were at a level where the weakest could take on Upper Moon 5 and win with slight difficulty, and the strongest could take Upper Moon 3 and win while maybe losing a limb. Looking on as Michikatsu first showed surprise, then downright shock, was oh so funny. While the 90 regular fully active members, the weakest could take on Upper Moon 4 and win, while maybe losing a few fingers, with the strongest being able to take down Upper Moon 2, while definitely losing a limb or two, but emerging victorious nonetheless, and these were just the rank and file. Seeing Michikatsu's expression become even more funny, I finished. The weakest apprentice could defeat Upper Moon 2 and only lose a finger or two, while the strongest could win against your previous self, while definitely losing an arm in the process. The weakest Yaiba, like I said before, was stronger than you. By how much? They could kill you in under a minute and not take any damage whatsoever. Michikatsu shivered, and I could just imagine his thoughts being how the old generation was terrifying. The strongest, like I said before, was equal to my level, with the middle one being able to definitely kill current Muzan while not receiving a single scratch. I finished my entire long-winded explanation. POV. Michikatsu. The old generation is absolutely terrifying, and Ryuki had to fight monsters like them on a daily basis? What monsters, all of them? These were my thoughts after hearing about the previous generation. The weakest demon slayer of today is absolutely pathetic. No, non-existent compared to the weakest demon slayer of the Technique Corps. Being able to win against Gyoko with only slight difficulty? What absolute sheer lunacy! If it was one of the lower moons or even Daki, that would make sense. But Gyoko? Gyoko was a demon he now despised with a passion, but Gyoko was Upper Moon 5 for a reason. And as for Duma, the weakest apprentice would only lose a finger in a battle against Duma. A finger. One measly finger. And the strongest? The strongest could win against his previous self, while only losing an arm in the process. And the weakest of the strongest of the entire Corps can defeat him in under a minute and not receive a single scratch in a fight against him. The middle could defeat current Muzan without a single scratch, while the absolute strongest makes Yorichi look like a baby. Enough said about that. I came out of my thoughts when I heard Father start speaking again. POV Yoshitsune. Now, son, Your training here will be about learning either a sword technique or making your own. You have a time limit of 6 months. If you don't successfully learn or make a sword technique in the 6-month time span, then you fail. I said with authority, watching my son to see his reaction. When I saw he wanted to speak, I waved a hand to signal he could speak. What happens if I fail? Hearing this, I let out a dark chuckle. Then we start the lesson that is usually before this one. I saw him shift nervously. And that lesson would be? He asked with some trepidation, why regenerating while standing on lava inside of Mount Fuji, of course? I said with dark delight, as I saw the horror spread across his face. Now, if you don't want that to happen, you will either learn a technique or make your own. Do you understand me? I said, as he rapidly nodded his head. Good. Then go get to work, I said calmly, as he disappeared from his spot, as I watched him go to the compound. Little does he know that even if he succeeds, he still will have to immediately after this do the lava regeneration training. I thought, as I did a mental cackle at my son's future training and what that will entail, oh, it's going to be so fun, I thought, with dark glee. Chapter 13. Physical Training. Time skip 1 month. POV. Michikatsu. It has been a month, and the moon was currently high above in the sky. Its shine could illuminate everything it touched. At least I thought this to be true, but Father told me something that shook me. Moonlight is only reflected sunlight. The moon does not shine, it only reflects. In that moment, I knew I could never shine, for I was not meant to shine, but to reflect. I at first thought this meant I could not do anything, but then it struck me, quite literally struck me. If you can only reflect, then reflect the techniques. You are still making a unique technique. You just are drawing from other techniques. How did you think the techniques or breathing styles Yorichi didn't come up with came to be? They reflected from the original technique or breathing and changed it. Doing that isn't bad, it's just natural. Father told me after hitting me over the head. For he was right. All I had to do was study the other techniques and draw on from them and my own moon breathing to make a new technique. The moon technique. I had a long way to go, though, for I had to first build up my physical strength. I already had immense strength as a demon, and the added strength I have from moon breathing. But according to Father, I did not have enough strength. When I asked him why he thought so, he said, "Son, the weakest of the cores could defeat Upper Moon 5. Think how much strength that would require to be gained." So I did think about it, and the answer? I had to train, so I did. I started off by doing all the exercises I would do as a demon slayer, and would not stop until I could feel my muscles ache. In so much protest it felt like they would vanish into nothingness. I did this for nights before I felt the ache stop, and I restarted again. I couldn't feel my muscles ache anymore, so I went to Father. He said that if I couldn't feel my muscles ache anymore, then I had already completed the first step. Father then told me about step 2 to increase my speed. I was slightly confounded as he just said to increase my speed, but not anything specific like my reaction speed, running speed, or swinging speed. He just said to increase my speed. I decided to first increase my running speed, so I sped about the entire area. I would do this until midnight, where I would then switch to increasing my reaction speed. I didn't have anything that seemed to actually work for this training, so I went to Father and asked him to be my training partner for this. He accepted, and I would spend that time all the way to a few minutes before sunrise, just watching him go for his blade in a blink, and I would have to respond to it. The next night, instead of running, I would practice my swinging speed. Instead of using a post, I used the air. Father would watch as I would swing my blade in all sorts of stances and positions. Afterwards, he would tell me how to notice how fast I swing by, watching the air move. He said that once I reach Ryuki's level, the air would not move as I swing my sword. Instead, my sword would push the air to form air blasts. He told me this was the first step in learning how to perform an long-ranged technique like the sun slash. The next step was to compound and mold the blast into a cut. But I was far away from learning about or ever doing that. So instead, I just watched how the air shifted as I swung my blade. To swing so fast that the air is pushed to make an air blast. How remarkable! That was my thought at the time, but I later learned that every Yeba could do such a thing. That Father considered it not all that remarkable, and that when he introduced how to do it to the Yaibas, they also considered it more of a modification than a revelation. That stung my pride, but I continued training, moving on to my reaction speed. It would be nights before I would be able to properly react to Father's speed. Though after 2 weeks had passed, he declared that my reaction speed was sufficient enough for learning techniques. Though while my reaction speed had reached that point, my running and swinging speed took another week before he declared that I was ready in those areas. I had successfully completed Step 2. Now was time for Step 3, learning a technique's philosophy. Now I was at first not surprised by this, as the breathing techniques also were more suited for different ways of combat. But it was not like how I thought it was, as my whole world seemed to be turned over on its head. The technique I chose to learn first about was the water technique, as it shared close ties to the moon. When Father handed me the scroll for the technique's philosophy, I was surprised. Instead of the philosophy of defense or counterattacking, I was expecting it was about fluidity, going with the flow of the current of battle, becoming that current. I was stumped. What did becoming the current of battle even mean? Nevertheless, I studied its philosophy in the daytime indoors, pondering its words and their meanings. Eventually, after a day of studying, I figured out what the fluidity meant: evasiveness in battle. But instead of outright dodging the attack, you were to, in a sense, flow around it. Imagine a current and a rock. I am the current, and my opponent is the rock, or is the attack my opponent makes. Instead of charging right at the opponent or their attack, I flow around it like water does. On the second day, I figured out what going with the flow of the battle meant. Going with the flow of the battle meant that I didn't fight against flow, but moved along with it, never controlling or fighting it, just flowing with it. If my opponent or opponents had control of the battle, then I followed that flow as it would throw them off of their advantage. For following the flow of battle meant that no one could change it, and those who did were the ones who paid the price. It took me another 3 days before I figured out what the final part of the water technique philosophy meant. To become the current of battle meant that no one controlled the current anymore, for you were that current. They could only try to fight against the current, while I would be almost untouchable to all of them. There was more, but looking closer at the scroll I realized something. This was the Water Yaba's scroll. I went to Father to ask him about it, and he confirmed that yes, I was reading the Water Yaba's scroll. I then asked, was the Water Yaba the one who invented the water technique? My father responded that yes, he was, and was the only one who could use it to its fullest potential, as even his apprentice only ever mastered just the basics of the technique. I was puzzled and asked why that was. He just chuckled. Remember what I said about Muzan declaring that Nagareru's swordsmanship transcended logic? I nodded to his question. Once you learn about the basics of the water technique, look at the advanced ones. Most are still just the same moves, but if you read their descriptions at what they are supposed to do, you will quickly realize how skilled Nagareru was when it came to swordsmanship. I just nodded and didn't bring the topic back up. It has now been a month since I first started, and I feel like while I have made progress, it is still not enough. Questions circled around in my thoughts constantly. Why were the advanced techniques so difficult? Why could only Nagareru master them? Why didn't Father include himself? Was Father saying he was inferior in swordsmanship to Nagareru? These thoughts were plaguing my mind for my entire time training. I knew I still had a long way to go before I could truly learn the water technique, and even think about making my own moon technique. I just prayed that I would before the 6th month ended, and I wouldn't have to go through what Yushiro had to.